Howdy Ringtail friends, let's go ahead and jump back on in. So I'm going to start out by painting the buttons a nice gold. Now I am using a model paint here, so I do have to go pretty thin layers. If you've never used model paint before, it can dry very sticky, and sometimes it will just never finish drying. And even if you clear coat your stuff, it will remain sticky. So I'm going to go ahead and mix up some Mod Podge and black paint to seal the emblem here. That way the gold model paint won't react with the clay and cause it to soften up. The silver model paint. As you can see, I'm just kind of covering it up here. I will do some detailing here in a minute. Alrighty, so I'm hitting this with a black wash, which is just water and black ink. I'm soaking up the excess, but as you can see, it really makes the details that I've sculpted pop quite a bit. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and get the base coated here. This is just some black paint to sort of cover it up so that the following dry brushes that I do will kind of stick a little bit better. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start with a dry brush of a lighter gray. Basically what that means is you wipe most of the paint off of your brush, and it really makes the highlights and sculpted details pop. So I'm hitting it with an even lighter dry brush using a sort of like a makeup brush, and this really catches the details and makes them shine. And I'm just going to kind of progressively hit it with lighter and lighter grays until I get a good brick texture. Then I'm hitting it with an ink wash as well to sort of make the lines and the recesses pop a little bit more, and then hitting it with another dry brush. Now I'm hitting the outside of the base with a matte black, just to kind of give it that studio sculpture art show vibe. I just think it looks nice that way. Then I'm going to go ahead and use some really light gray to give some highlights to the bricks. This kind of gives them more of a three-dimensional appearance, even though they are just flat on the surface with a couple of lines carved out. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit it with some dark to give some shadows and just sell the look a little bit more. As you can see, one final brush with a dry brush to really make everything sing, and that is basically it. Gonna go ahead and check him out here. He's all primed up with a light gray. Unfortunately, it's not quite the gray of the character model, so I do have to end up painting gray over gray. Here I am just kind of covering the weird tree thingy in a matte black. Again, I really don't know what I was going for with this part of the sculpture, but I think it looks fine in the end, and it doesn't really detract from the actual detail of the sculpture himself. This was especially important because the sculpture can be displayed with or without the clothing. So I just kind of wanted to give the base a more neutral look, as there is a lot of detail going on in the final product. After I scored some lines on both the base and the sculpture, I can glue them on with just some hot glue. Alright, he's looking good. So now I do have to cover up most of his gray with a lighter gray, just to try and match the color a little bit better to what he looks like in the game. So I do apologize that a pretty good portion of this next part of the video is literally just gray getting painted over gray. So I know that's not the most exciting thing, but it kind of just is what it is. It does kind of suck that I had to do this, because when I primed him, I used the gray and a lighter gray to sort of give a highlight on top of the sculpture to make it look like light was shining down. And right now, I'm literally just covering up all of that. So I hit it with a couple lighter shades just to really sell the highlight look here, to give all the raised portions of his muscles a little bit more emphasis. Now his fur, his tufts, I guess you would call it, get a darker gray. In the game, they're quite a bit darker than his actual fur. I wasn't sure how dark to go though, because he does have some stripes that I need to paint on later. But I think it turned out just the right color, and it dried to where the detail still shows up pretty well. A lot of the times you do want to start with a base coat that's a lot darker than what you would expect as well, because when you start to do dry brushing and go lighter and lighter, sometimes it ends up too bright. So I think this is sort of a nice in between there. Do apologize if you can hear my computer whining. Editing videos makes my computer turn into basically a stovetop. I could definitely cook an entire turkey on this thing. All right, so here's my boy. I think he's looking pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and finish up some of the hair details here with the darker paint. That way I can start doing the dry brushing. You'll notice in this video, I'm going to try and kind of shut up a little bit more, just because I find painting really relaxing, and I sort of want to just give you guys a little bit of zen this time around. I will still try to point out certain things that I find interesting or would like to explain a little bit better, but for the most part, I'm going to kind of stay quiet during these long spans of painting. Now I'm going to go ahead and paint him a nice pink boopable snoot. I absolutely love how these are giant, terrifying lion men, and they are still super cute. I want to pet all of them. Now, as I mentioned before, he is based off of Baxter from the game that I'm creating. And Baxter is a raccoon, so I am giving him the little black tips on his ears like a raccoon would have. I'm going to go ahead and paint the tufts of fur in his ears. They're a nice bright white. I do apologize about the camera. It is slipping off of the stand. It is just a cell phone stuck to a window mount, stuck to my desk. After giving the whites of his eyes a little bit of a darker gray color, I go ahead and paint in his pupils, but I actually just use a gel pen so that I can get finer detail. I do end up painting over his eyes a couple of different times, because once I start getting these details on here, these little markings, I start to realize how bad I did sculpting his eyes out. And I have to do a little bit of finagling, oh, there's the word of the day, with the paint to sort of hide some of the sins that I have committed. Plus, he's a little wonky-eyed right now, so I do have to fix that. I really like these cool, they almost look like Native American markings that he's got on his eyes here. Um, I just think they're a really nice touch. Make his eyes look a little bit shiny, as if there's light reflecting in them. And then they are pretty much done. Again, he is based off of a raccoon character, so I do need to put a mask on him. I tried out this face paint in the game pretty early on and was not very happy with it because it was just a big bar across their face. So when I changed his facial structure and his hairdo to this more hipster looking style, I found out that you could change the eyebrows of this particular option to face down in the middle, which really gave it that raccoon mask look that I was going for. Now, one quick dry brush of his chest fur, his hair, and the little tufts of fur on his arms, and it really brings out the detail and gets rid of some of the glossiness of the paint. You can't really tell on camera, unfortunately, but it does look really good in the final product. Alrighty, I think he's looking pretty great. I do a little bit more touching up here and there. Again, I am so sorry about my camera. Then I go ahead and paint those little clasps I was telling you guys about. So the detail that I carved into them I think looks really good, and I do make it pop with a little bit of an ink wash here in a bit. But unfortunately, in the process of getting them sealed to keep the paint from staying sticky over time, I built up a few too many layers, and in the final product, they are completely flat. But you can still see all of the detail through the glossy outer coating. I add his little chesty stripes, which I really think are super cute. It is a little bit weird for a raccoon to have stripes, but it definitely draws a little bit more attention to the chest and makes it a little bit more interesting to look at. I'm also very proud of myself for just freehanding these. I have very shaky hands, so there was a 99% chance that I was going to royally screw these up and have to start over with painting the chest. Luckily, I did not have to do that. Alrighty, so I'm doing just a quick ink wash over the hair on his head to really bring out the sculpting that I did, and then I do end up hitting it with another dry brush. Alright, so now it's on to the clothes. The clothes were really fun to paint, but they took about a bazillion coats, and the clay that I'm using, since it's rubberized, really gets screwed up by a lot of different paints. So I had to do a lot of testing. So here are all of my supplies. So right now I'm just going to go ahead and paint this with some Mod Podge and black paint. Again, this will act as sort of a sealant to hopefully protect it from some of the paints that I'm going to be using and some of the sealants. Again, this rubberized clay can get eaten up by this kind of thing. Unfortunately, now that he's done, his clothes do kind of stick to each other a little bit, so I may have to go over it again with a little bit more matte varnish. I did a couple of layers of blue here, and then the collar itself is done. I do end up dry brushing it off camera to really just kind of make the furry pattern look a little bit better. Now, this scarf, I know it seems a little bit weird that I'm painting something red, more red, and it actually took about 10 coats of paint, a couple of dry brushes, and a dark wash. So as you can see, I'm dry brushing it with a much lighter pink color to really bring out the raised areas. Now it is far too pink, so once I get it dry here, I go ahead and give it a couple of coats of a nearly translucent red that will kind of allow the pink to show through, but it's not going to be quite so atrocious. Then I hit it with a dark wash, clean up the excess to make the recesses show up a little bit better, and for the most part it is done after I repeat the process. I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I tend to repeat steps over and over and over until they are as perfect as I can get them. Now, the shirt here took about 25 coats of paint, and that's because a lot of blue paints are pigmented really poorly. So you just have to be patient, use a hair dryer in between layers, or else you're going to drive yourself crazy. All right, so now it's time to paint these little buckles here. I really don't like base coating little details like this. They can be kind of a pain in the butt, but luckily they weren't too bad. I hit it with a dry brush. Unfortunately, I was not paying attention to the camera placement, and I just really wanted to get these details knocked out here. So the lighter blue dry brush will really sell the fabric pattern that I have. And as you can already see, it's looking pretty good. All right, I try not to show too much of the mixing paint in this video because I don't want the video to run too long. But I did decide to show you the process of making a wash. Now I covered the entire shirt here, and this will definitely help the details show up a little bit better. I do wipe off the excess so that it doesn't just look dirty, and then I go ahead and hit it with another dry brush here in a minute. Go ahead and cover up some of the shading that I did not wipe up, and that will just kind of make everything look a little bit more cohesive. Hit it with a really light dry brush to bring back out those patterns and the fabric texture. As you can see, it looks pretty good. Now, there's this weird little leather strip on the strap here, and I really enjoyed painting this. My hands are really shaky, so it was kind of a pain in the butt, but I find these little details very satisfying. It's also nice too because if you screw up on a small detail like this, it's usually pretty easy to just get a different color and fix your mistake. So like you see here, I kind of get a little bit too much of the tan color. I just wipe it up with a Q-tip and then I go over it later with some blue, and it's like it never even happened. Perfect. Now I go ahead and dab a Q-tip in some darker brown to give the leather strip more of a pronounced look, and a little bit more like it's an actual aged leather. I base coat the black belt with more black because again, I just really love doing that apparently. And it also does give me a chance to clean up some of the smudges of blue that I got all over the place. I am not the most careful person when it comes to painting. Again, my hands just do whatever they want. All right, so back to those straps for the top of his shirt sleeves. I do base coat them in black and Mod Podge really quick. Unfortunately, I didn't put enough Mod Podge in them, so now with the final product, they are still a bit sticky. I hit them with a hair dryer really quick and then give them a light gray dry brush along with the belt. And again, this just makes the edges and stuff show up a little bit better. And it also gives it a little bit more of an aged leather look. Back to the tan color here. I, again, was just very satisfied doing these little details. Something about hitting the dark areas with this really light, just almost vibrant tan was just really satisfying. kind of reminds me of pouring milk on cereal. That probably doesn't make any sense, but that's just the way my brain works. Really especially liked getting these little nooks and crannies in here. I could watch this for hours, and even while recording this, sometimes I forget to talk and have to re-record it because I'm just staring at my painting with a slack jaw. Alrighty, now I'm back at it again with the dark brown and the Q-tip to give that nice leather effect. It's almost like a felt material, I'm not quite sure. In the screen caps I took, I literally thought it was a bright gold, so I'm glad I took the time to pay attention. I color in the buttons here with a nice gold, and then here I am painting the buckles. I was really worried that by copying the buckle with some of the UV resin, it would lose the detail, but I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. And the gold really kind of gives its own shading, which is nice, but I do end up hitting it with a dark wash here a little bit later to make the lines that I had sculpted stand out. And with that completed, we are pretty much finished. You can see everything's looking pretty good here. So now it is time for assembly. I'm using some Gorilla Super Glue Gel because it tends to destroy things a little bit less than other super glues. And again, I was very worried due to the fact that I'm using this rubberized clay. If you remember in the last video, I said that I regretted using the pen to mark where the buttons are, and that's because I marked them poorly. So I do end up having to pull off a little bit of paint and kind of have to do some finagling with paint to cover up where I ripped it off. Everything's going pretty well, and then this super glue covered button decides to just do whatever the heck it wants, and I get super glue all over my fingers and all over the paint, and it was a nightmare. But I finally get it to work out, and it's on to gluing on the shoulder straps, which did rip off some of the paint, and I ended up actually having to cut them down quite a bit because they were far too large for the color to fit, because I did not remember them in the planning stage. So here he is, the boy is all painted up, he's done. I've got everything taken care of. There's a funny little sort of rhythm I have to go in to get everything put on, but I think he looks pretty damn good. And with that, guys, it is on to the glamour shots.